What's going on YouTube? It's Teej, back again with another video. Today, I'm giving you my updated 2023 wide receiver rankings and post-Senior Bowl edition at that. So, really excited to share this list with you. I got 15 wide receivers to talk about, some players moving up after their appearance at Mobile, some players moving down for my preseason rankings, but nonetheless, should make for a fun video. Let me hear your rankings down below. If you want to just give me your 1 through 5, I think that's, honestly, I think that speaks enough about what you like in a wide receiver, and I think this 1 through 5 in and of itself has so much variance and differs so much based on the person you're talking to. It'll change person to person a ton. So let me hear your 1 through 5 or all 15. How would you rank the 15 I'm throwing out? Who'd I leave off this list? Love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. It's a very subjective, draft rankings is very person-based. So love to see your list down below, but hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. If you do, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new around here, want more draft content, be sure to subscribe. But let's go ahead and jump, and we're going to go 10 up to 1, and then I'll show you my honorable rankings or honorable mentions after we go through my top 10 rankings. Michael Wilson, one of the people who really showcased and balled out at the Senior Bowl, and a guy who I have to walk back a little bit of some of the stuff I said earlier this draft cycle, because I have said about Tanner McKee, yeah, well, he had no help at Stanford. We're not talking about any Stanford wide receivers going in the first round. Well, we're not, and furthermore, I still think Michael Wilson's probably a day 2 guy, third round-ish type of guy. But here, looking at his his career stats, never more than 56 catches in a season. That was all the way back in 2019. So unfortunately, not a guy who got to play a whole lot at Stanford. So I don't think I'm necessarily wrong when I said Tanner McKee did not have a good supporting cast. And who knows how different this process could be for McKee and Wilson if he had just been able to see the field a little bit more, because he looked great at Mobile. I mean, he looked like a guy who belonged somewhere there in the top 100. So, I mean, him boosting himself in the top 10 in this list and boosting himself in that top 100 conversation is solely pretty much based on the Senior Bowl and looking so good in those one-on-ones. May not be the most fleet of foot, but 6'2", 210. I think he kind of just builds that possession type of wide receiver. And I think this is kind of a class that's lacking that. We have a lot of slot types, and I think this class is kind of missing those 6'2", big body framed guys that I think could go in the top 100, and then also guys with absolute top tier elite speed. There's a few names I'm going to talk about in this list, but that's kind of it. The reason some of those names are on this list is because it's few and far between that we have those burners in this class. But Michael Wilson really showed out the Senior Bowl, and again, I wish I could have seen him play more at Stanford, because in turn, Tanner McKee might have looked that much better. So it could have been a win-win for both those guys. But hey, only so much you can control. A little bit of an older prospect again. Going back to 2019 was the year he had the most catches in his Stanford career. So a little bit on the older side, but I still love what I saw at the Senior Bowl. And then Kayshon Boutte, he's kind of a confusing one because he was going to go back to LSU, then he decided to declare. Preseason rankings, I had him in the top 3 if memory serves, if not that, certainly the top 5. Awesome downfield speed, can make as a great satellite weapon, also has the route running ability. You go back 2 years ago now, and I mean, you see flashes of it pre-injury where it's like, dude, this guy as a burner, yeah, a little small, but there ain't nobody getting close to him. Nobody can touch him at the line for that matter as well. Really good release. So I don't know. He's kind of a confusing prospect, and unfortunately this year at LSU, the bright moments were few and far between. So he definitely took himself out of that first round conversation, but man, speed talks, and I mean, you can't teach it. So I still think he's going to be somewhere in that top 100 mix. I've had him go second, third round over the last couple of mocks. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for Boutte, just because there's so much you can do with that speed, and it does feel like a guy who, especially with the coaching change there at LSU, I think once he gets into an NFL system, ideally has some stability at OC, head coach, that sort of stuff. He has a defined role. I think he can get a lot better play out of him. Then we get to Jalin Hyatt. I'll give Hyatt a slight bump over Boutte. I think Boutte has more of a route tree than Hyatt. In that Josh Heupel offense, it's go balls and it's hitches off of that. And I mean, you might see something else, but realistically, it's that. In the Heupel offense, I don't think Hyatt was asked to do a whole lot, but that said, he did play on the outside, which, I mean, someone with that speed and given his height, if you can play inside and out, I will give you some bias there. I certainly like that. I think Boutte can do it as well, but Hyatt, I think, showcased that pretty well this year at Tennessee. Does have good hands, and especially in those hitch routes, he is tough to bring down after the catch. So it's tricky. I think back to De'Ami Brown a couple years ago coming out of UNC, and he fell all the way to the third round. To me, I thought he could go as early as late 1. I was kind of eyeing Green Bay, and I was like, this is who I want the Packers to draft. Didn't end up happening. He falls day 3, goes to Washington. And I think a big part of that is his route tree was, verticals, posts, comebacks, and that was about it. It was everything vertical, and then the comeback off of that. Hyatt, I think, has the same problem, and I wouldn't be surprised if he drops because of it. So then we get to Parker Washington, not nearly as gifted when it comes to long speed like Hyatt, not nearly the burner that Hyatt is because of it. But I think of a shifty enough route runner from the slot, good enough speed, the quickness is there. Like, he doesn't do anything that necessarily wows you, other than one thing, which you don't see it a whole lot, but when you do see it, it is kind of a wow moment, which I'll come back to. But just a guy who does a lot of different things really well, which is just kind of, it feels like you're describing a slot wide receiver in and of itself, right? But the one thing I think he does do at a pretty good level, when you see it, this guy can go up and get it. I've said this a few times on the channel where he's got some Jahan Dotson in him, which you don't want a helmet scout, but there's something about these, smaller wide receivers. They're not petite fully, they're not like, D. Eskridge or like Tutu Atwell, but, they're on the lighter and smaller, shorter size. But, dude, Dotson and Parker Washington both have these clips in their tape where it's like, damn, those guys have body control. They can go catch it. They know when to time their jump. They just do a whole lot of those little things really, really well. And if you're telling me he can do that on top of being, a shifty route runner, someone who's also solid with the ball in his hands, has enough quickness, has enough speed, man, if he can do all those little things well, I mean, I could see this guy totally stepping into a starting slot wide receiver role, which, let me also, just make this clear. I need to be better about these videos differentiating tiers. Wilson is probably in a tier with the honorable mentions where it's like you have a very defined role, and I'm not sure there's a whole lot of upside beyond that. Like Michael Wilson, I think, is a dependable X. Then Butte, Hyatt, just because of their speed, I'll put them in their own tier because it's like I think you can put them in an offense to be wide receiver threes. But man, just given that speed and with the right coaching, they could become more. So they're 3 with upside. And then you get to Parker Washington, to me, is probably just a 3. I just think he comes with a little bit of a higher floor, more expansive route tree than those guys. So Washington, Hyatt, Butte, honestly, if you mix these 3 in any order, I wouldn't argue with you. I just think Washington has the highest floor, so I'll give him the nudge over Hyatt and Butte. I do like him a ton. And, I really underestimated Dotson's ball skills and his ability to go win in the air a ton. And I thought of him as a second, third round guy. He goes top 16. I did not like that pick for Washington, but he kind of proved me wrong. He played well when he was on the field this year. So I'm hoping Washington do the same thing. Then we get to Tank Dell, who, again, a little bit of a different tier, and he'll kind of bleed into the 1 through 5. Specifically, Dell and my number 5 guy. It just comes down to what your flavor is, what are you looking for. But Dell might have been the biggest single winner out of the Senior Bowl. I mean, nobody can touch this dude. Also, a 6-foot wingspan. That's huge because this guy, 5'10", 165, shades of Tutu Atwell here, maybe a little taller, but it's like, man, Tutu Atwell sees press coverage and he is done. Like, the play is over for him. Like, he just cannot get off the line. But I think with a 6-foot wingspan, Tank Dell has the ability to initiate that contact or at least have a better chance of fighting off that hand play at the line of scrimmage. You know what I'm saying? And then off of that, if a corner misses on Tank Dell at the line, the play's done for the corner because there ain't nobody catching up to Tank Dell. This dude is faster than a bullet, moves as quick as one too. I mean, it's that combination of not only speed but quickness to go with it that made Kadarius Toney so interesting, right? Dell's got that. And again, the route running was also put on display. With that type of quickness, but also the detail in his routes. I mean, sharp cuts. It makes him really, really tough to defend. I think he can play inside and out. I'd love to see this guy play from the slot and, run that, 10-yard in because good luck, nickel corner. Good luck, safety, keeping up with him. But also, again, even if you press him at the line, I think the wingspan is there to where he'll be able to fight off that press. And if you whiff straight up, he's gone. So I think he can have that inside-out versatility. Also, was a volume wide receiver at Houston, which I know it's Houston, like whatever. It's not doing the same. It's not like it's doing the same thing at Alabama or LSU or something like that. Clemson, Ohio State. But nonetheless, I mean, over 100 catches this year, almost 1,400 yards. This is a guy who has been comfortable in a role where he is the dude, which I don't think he'll get that at the NFL level. But nonetheless, it's kind of nice knowing that he's able to do that. And then I think it's easier. I think it's easier to build down and downscale someone's role versus like this guy didn't do a whole lot and now we're asking him to do a bunch more, So I do think Dell is kind of uniquely equipped there. So he's in a little bit of his own tier with my number 5 wide receiver. So let's go ahead and transition top 5. Him and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Josh Downs too. I'll put all 3 of those in kind of their own tier. Downs and Dell kind of feel similar. and the fact that speed is the number one thing that comes to mind. Also, can we just talk about Tank Dell? Like, what an awesome nickname for somebody who is 5'10", 165. We're going to skip over JSN because I think he's the most interesting player for me to talk about here. I feel like I am by far one of the lowest people on JSN. But, Downs and Dell, again, the speed is the first thing that comes to mind. I think Dell is much more an expansive route runner. I think this guy can win in that, 10 to 20 yard range, where Downs, I think he's a satellite player. You get him the ball at the line of scrimmage, or you're playing his speed and you're trying to go along with it. That said, I do want to give a ton of credit to UNC, especially with a guy like Drake May. It's just like, how can we find Josh Downs? So the volume was there, so some of the same stuff I was talking about with Tank Dell. But when you look at his tape, a lot of that versus, Tank Dell, I think he can be kind of a savant with his route running. Downs is doing that a ton on crossers, which is not a bad thing. Like, I said this on the channel, I think that's part of what had Christian Watson kind of fully start to realize his potential. Beginning of the year, he was trying to run wide receiver routes, and he just wasn't ready. And then when he was getting open, he was dropping it. Off of crossers, you allowed him to just basically take shapes, just round off that edge. He's an unbelievable athlete. He's 6'4", leverage that. You don't need him to run the crispest in. Just let him run a crosser, run away from a dude, and also like the ability to catch. This is hard for me to do on camera, but him running a crosser over the middle of the field, it's easier for him to turn his head versus having to completely contort his body and catch it over his shoulder. So those types of crossing routes, if an NFL team can do the same thing with Josh Downs, then the route running concerns are kind of gone by the wayside, because he becomes an awesome satellite player, someone who can run those drags and crosses and utilize his speed. And then you also have that over the top, aspect. Downs is probably slot only, so I kind of thought about maybe even switching Dell and Downs in this, maybe giving JSN the bump up to 4, but kind of, I don't know. I like Downs a ton, so even in a defined role, and that one that is slot only, despite him saying he thinks he can play on the outside, I think he's going to be slot only. I think he does that job really, really well. So I'll give him the bump there. Again, these guys are kind of, they're all in their own tier. So whether Tank Dell, Josh Downs, JSN, however you order it, I get it. So then we come back to Jackson Smith-Njigba. Yeah, I didn't want to put him at 6 too. So that's the other complicated part of this, is if I put him at 6, a lot of people are going to be like, you're an idiot. It's just like, so keep him in the top 5. And I do want to have respect for the fact that despite him being a guy who I think is going to run low 4.5s into the 4.6s, which is kind of a problem for someone who's 6'1", 6'1". But despite that limited athletic upside, the dude is a really good route runner. He has good hands. Another guy who can win in the air. I just think he's going to be a slot only at the next level. So again, I kind of thought about giving Tank Dell the bump just because I think he comes with inside-out versatility. But JSN, I think, is going to be a slot only guy. And I think that's really the best place they can leverage him being able to find the soft spots in the zone and try to break away from man coverage against maybe not as athletic corners. Maybe, some teams are a little different, but sometimes number 3 corners for some teams are just, it's the third best corner they have. So I think matchup-wise, it's more favorable for Jackson Smith-Njigba to be there in the slot role. I don't know. I am not sold that with such a limited athletic upside that he'll be able to do it at the next level. And I mean, I know he had the insane Rose Bowl. It's just different against college DBs versus the NFL level. So I don't know. I'm conflicted, because then you also have Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave being like, nah, JSN's the best of us. And I'm like, well, damn, that's impressive. So I know I'm definitely on the low side. I didn't want to put him at 6 because that feels like I'm breaking too far against the consensus. There's a reason so many people love him. So I do want to lean on what other people see in him. And I will say, when it comes to his route running, his ability to win in the air, and his football IQ, finding the soft spots in zone, sinking into it, he does do that well. So again, 4, 5, and 6, Tank Dell, Downs, and JSN. I think you can order it in just about any way. With the more days I think about it, I kind of want to move Tank Dell up a little bit more. But for right now, I'll probably do one more set of these rankings. So right now, I'm going to have Dell at 6 and then JSN 5, Downs at 4. Then we get into our next tier. This is Addison and Flowers. I'll kind of put them in their own tier. These, to me, are 2 of the best route runners in this class. JSN's a good route runner, but not a whole lot of that's vertical. I think Addison and Flowers both have the ability to do it almost at all 3 levels. Flowers for sure, because Flowers, I think, could legitimately be a satellite player, get him the ball out in space, let him play the slot. Again, a guy with inside-out versatility, love that. I think Addison can do it too, but primarily played on the outside in college. So again, easier to ask an outside guy to learn how to play in the inside versus the other way around. But Flowers, really fluid mover. I mean, him and Christian Gonzalez are the 2 guys in this class that when I watch them in space, it's like, wow. It does not look like you're trying. It's just effortless. Which for Gonzalez, it's like, dude, you're 6'2". What? You should not be able to move like that. Flowers, at least, it's like you're 5'10", 170. All right, that makes a little more sense. But Nonetheless, I don't care. Like, this dude moves like very few in this class do. Because of that, he's very shifty after the catch. Can be a guy who, if you pair him up with a rookie quarterback, let's say, he can make the game simple. Just get the ball out to Flowers quick and let him do the rest. But he's also a really sharp route runner, can work the intermediate stuff. So I think, running slants on the inside from the slot position, that's something he could do. He can work that, 10 to 20 yard range pretty highly, but also with his long speed and his sharp route running, becomes a weapon deep down the field. And he had a ton of those big long balls reeled in at Boston College. So he showcased that he could do it all three levels. Addison, he's kind of where I'm like, I don't know necessarily all three levels because he's not a satellite player. Like Addison does not do much after the catch. He is not a yards after the catch dude. But, he could run a drag. So if you want to call that underneath, yeah, sure, he could do that. So Addison right now, I'll give the edge as the best route runner in his class. But he also comes with a few drop concerns, both at Pittsburgh and USC. Beginning of this year at USC, I was like, okay, he's starting to clean it up. Then they kind of start to resurface, and I was like, well, damn it, come on, Addison. You're not helping yourself here, man. So that being said, getting open is the harder skill in my opinion. So, spend some time on the jugs machine with whoever drafts him, and let's hope that the hands kind of come along with some time. Now, granted, Jerry Jeudy is still kind of being plagued by some of the, inabilities to go win the ball in the air. He doesn't have great ball skills. Has had some drops. He's a great route runner, but he's been kind of limited by how weak maybe he is in those other skills. So I hope Addison isn't the same thing. But man, especially in that 10 to 20 yard range, this dude could be a murderer against DBs. So love his route running ability. Also has that deep downfield speed to go with it. So yeah, I like Flowers. I like Addison a ton. I go back and forth between them at wide receiver 2 and 3. So again, easier to think about this in tiers versus like strictly numbers. So you could flip 2 and 3. You could flip any order 4 through 6. You could flip any order, 7 through 9. I think, all that is pretty interchange. It comes down to flavor. Like, do I need a big body slot? Okay, give me Jackson Smith-Njigba. Or do I want a burner? Let me get, Tank Dell, that sort of stuff. Anyways, driving that point home more than enough, I'm sorry. But Quentin Johnston, my number one. To me, he's the guy with the most upside too. So playing off potential, he's the guy. And I want to pick this picture because I know he was quiet against Georgia in the college football championship game, but man, TCU was quiet. And Max Duggan, he had that one rushing touchdown like on their second drive. But other than that, that TCU had nothing. And as a wide receiver, like if the offensive line can't hold up against Georgia, you're not going to get the ball. If Max Duggan can't do anything against Georgia, especially with his offensive line falling apart in front of him, Quentin Johnston's not going to get the ball. So he had a quiet championship game, but I really don't hold that against him as opposed to the House of Cards came crashing in under a bowling ball that was the Georgia defense. So that said, this Michigan game I think really showcased his potential. You saw him do it underneath, forced missed tackles, also got open deep down the field, put that speed on display. He's 6'4", 215, 220. I think he'll run 4.3 minimum. Low 4.4s, maybe a 4.4 flat. And I think the deep route running's there. Also great body control in the air. It's amazing to watch somebody that big be able to go up in the air and it feels like he can control any part of his body. It's almost video game-esque. It's like he's got a controller in full control, for lack of a better term, of each part of his body. So he really is a special player. Didn't have the hugest role at TCU, but I think that Michigan game kind of proved it when it was like, hey, we need a big play. Where's one? Where is number one? And they started to look for him. And I think that was his solidifying wide receiver 1 performance, because that to me showcased, you get this guy on an NFL team that knows what they're doing with him week in and week out, and they know to look for him. This guy could be a force. He could be a problem. And he, unlike Addison, I don't think is much of an intermediate threat. Like 10 to 20 yard range isn't really where he cooks, but 4.3 speed, slippery, forces a bunch of missed tackles, let him be that satellite line of scrimmage, yards after the catch weapon, and then obviously the deep downfield speed with the body control and the ability to just outrun DBs makes him a good deep threat as well. So I think he wins underneath and long versus, not so much the intermediate. But to me, also the guy with the highest potential in this class. But nonetheless, that is my 1 through 10. Now let's talk about some of the honorable mentions. And a few Senior Bowl guys I'm going to talk about off the top. Rashee Rice. I actually had some pushback. I talked about him in my mock. I thought he played pretty well at the Senior Bowl. A lot of the clips I saw and then in the game itself, I thought he was separating enough. He is not a guy that... He's not Zay Flowers. Don't expect him to just blow people off the line. He is not Tank Dell. He's not going to torch fools. He is a 6'3", 210, 215 pound, big body receiver who wins in those contested catch spots. And when I saw him do that, he looked pretty good. And he actually had a few, pretty solid route wins on the first day, and those one-on-ones. Now, granted, one-on-ones at the Senior Bowl are kind of tricky because wide receivers have the leg up, and I think pass rushers have the leg up. When you are proactive, when you are initiating where the play is going to go, and the DB is just reacting to you, you just naturally have a half second to a second advantage, unless a DB is saying, hey, I know you're running this in route, or an edge or offensive tackle knows, hey, I know he's going to go to that spin. I'm going to stop it. So with that point aside, the advantage is on the wide receiver and the edge rusher side, in my opinion. So yeah, Rashee Rice, maybe part of the reason he got the separation is because of the drill. That's fair. And if that's your case, I totally get it. And then, the Goat House, who I respect a ton. I mean, great YouTuber, great draft pundit. His rationale was, Rashee Rice didn't shine like a Michael Wilson, like a Jayden Reed, who's the next guy I'm going to talk about. And I get that. Sure, other guys had better days, but just because someone else has a better day at the office doesn't mean you didn't have a good one. I mean, I think Rashee Rice had a pretty solid week. And again, in a defined role. Like, I love him going to the Giants because I think he should be what Kenny Golladay was supposed to be. In that clearly defined role, he makes sense. So again, going back to our tiers list, Michael Wilson, Rashee Rice, Cedric Tillman, they all kind of feel like one and the same. These possession X types, big body with size. Wilson at 6'2", 205. Rashee Rice, I think, is 6'3", 215. And then Cedric Tillman, 6'3", I think 210, 215, maybe even 220 if memory serves. But again, similar stuff I was talking about with Rashee Rice. He has a clearly defined roles. He'll win outside the numbers. Contested catches, not much of a route runner. I think Tillman's probably the slowest of the three. We'll see once we get to 40 times, but I'm anticipating 4.5 speed from Tillman. But nonetheless, you keep those three guys in a clearly defined possession role. Let them win with their size, physicality, contested catchability. They will do that job for you. So again, it comes down to flavor. As promised, Jayden Reed, other than Michael Wilson, to me probably, Tank Dell's probably the biggest overall winner, straight up. Him and John Michael Schmitz kind of immediately come to mind. But him, Tank Dell, number one wide receiver winner, and then it's Michael Wilson and Jayden Reed right there as the next 2 and 3 biggest winners from the Senior Bowl. And he's a guy that I don't think really does any one thing well. Also sub 6 foot, right around 5'11", 190-ish pounds, 195 maybe. But just does a lot of things right. And I don't think gaudy speed. I think mock draft buzz has him projected at a 4.44. So solid speed, you can win with it. He's, again, not a master of one thing, but just solid, well-rounded, can do a lot of things well. And I think with a lot of playing experience under his belt, I think that's a big reason why he looks so good at the Senior Bowl. I think this is a guy who can win above the shoulders in a lot of ways. So good Senior Bowl week. And again, kind of going back to Michael Wilson and Rashee Rice, it's tough because wide receivers dictate. They drive those one-on-ones. So I don't want to put too much stock into it, but Jayden Reed was not going to be on this list, but he looked really good at Mobile, so I did want to include him here. Again, a guy who I think just does a lot of different things at a pretty high level as opposed to being a master at one specific skill set. Then Raheem Jarrett. This is I just expect more out of Raheem Jarrett this year, man. I was so excited. He was on my wide receiver honorable mentions. He was the top name there, the number 6 receiver we talked about way back when. And I was like, dude, this Maryland offense can be scary. I mean, Talia Tagovailoa, Jalen Duncan's catching first-round hype, and they also have Dante Demas, who's this big-bodied dude. Him and Jarrett form a really nice compliment. Man, I don't know. Maryland might be crazy. Unfortunately, they didn't really meet my expectations. That offense was kind of hit and miss week in and week out. And Jarrett, man, 6 foot. I think he'll run low 4.4s. I've even seen some stuff say maybe 4.3s. That'd be interesting. And a really good route runner. I stand by it. I think Raheem Jarrett is a very solid route runner. I just don't know if it was the offense, his role, him and Tagovailoa didn't have the chemistry. His production just didn't do great. His PFF grades was not nearly as high as the 2 years before. So, I'm someone who thinks their grading system does a pretty good job. Comes down to your opinion about it. So, we'll leave that at that. But even from their standard, had a down year. So I'm hoping this guy, and at this point, tier of his own, away from Tillman, Rice, Wilson, and probably even a step below Reed. Jarrett's probably the most projection guy I have on this 15-player list. I just think kind of like, Stephon Diggs, 5th-round pick, which, I have to be careful saying this. I'm not saying Raheem Jarrett's going to be Stephon Diggs, but I think, if he goes day 3, gets the right system, and just gets in with a good wide receiver coach, I mean, as lame as that is to say, I think that can make a world of difference. I already actually think this guy does a whole lot of things right. I think this guy could just ultimately step into a better situation at the NFL level. So kind of contradicting myself because at the same time, I don't really think he needs a lot of coaching. He's a pretty good route runner, and I think he's got enough athleticism. It just comes down to let's find that role. Let's find that chemistry with the quarterback. I was really disappointed by his step back this year at Maryland, and honestly, I have no great explanation for why the hell it happened. And then we'll end this now with talking about Marvin Mims, 5'11", 183, maybe 185 pounds, thereabout. Good long speed. I could totally see him being mid, maybe 4.38, somewhere around there. And one of those guys who, 2 years ago at Oklahoma, I was like, okay, Marvin Mims is about to be a dude. Like that guy might be a first rounder in a couple of years. I don't really think so. I'm thinking more of a round 3, round 4, maybe even round 5 type of guy. Probably slot only, but he does have that speed. So like a team like Cleveland, who is who I had him go to in my last mock draft. To me, that makes a ton of sense. Add that speed, slot wide receiver. He can be a satellite guy. He has a little bit of moves, a little bit of juice to work the intermediate parts of the field. But again, the long speed and his yards after the catch ability are really what you're coveting here. And I mean, to give him a break, that first year at Oklahoma, he had Lincoln Riley as his play caller, and had some good quarterback play as well. So yeah, then Riley's gone. You lose Caleb Williams too. The situation around him kind of eroded away. So I think that plays a factor in it as well. Because I mean, if it was his rookie year all 3 years, or his rookie year, excuse me, his freshman year at Oklahoma all 3 years, I mean, this guy is firmly in the day 2 mix, like firmly second round conversation, if not more. So it comes down to, can you get him back to that very first year at Oklahoma? Can you get back into his full upside? And the NFL level, I'm hopeful that he'll be able to do that. He has a lot of traits working in his favor. Again, with that speed, especially working on that slot role, I think there's something to be worked into. Get him with a good offensive coordinator. Again, I love that Cleveland fit. I think Stefanski would get a ton of good stuff out of him. So we'll have to wait and see where the fit and where he ends up ultimately. But that is going to do it for my updated 2023 wide receiver rankings. Gave you 10 all the way up to 1 plus 5 honorable mentions. Let me hear your reactions to this list down below in the comment section. Do you think I'm crazy? It's specifically about Jackson Smith-Njigba. If you like JSN a ton, tell me why I'm wrong. As long as you're not a total asshole about it, I will respond to you and indulge in a conversation, because I am curious. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, but give me your list 1 through 5. Love to hear that as well. And maybe who are the names I left off this list that should have been included? Maybe I'll include them in my next round of updated wide receiver rankings. But that's going to do it for me. Leave your thoughts down below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. But until next time, my name is Teach, and I'm signing off.